Welcome in. Um, Whether you are prepping for a big meeting, trying to catch up on the world, or you are just, insanely curious about how systems work, you are in the right place.
Absolutely.
You are the learner, and we know exactly what you want. A quick, thorough, and structured download of fascinating information without that heavy feeling of information overload.
Nobody wants that.
Right. So today we have a deep dive that takes something seemingly invisible and shows how it can turn an entire system upside down. We're looking at a simple, blank option on a ballot paper.
Yeah, that's a great topic.
Specifically, we're diving into the Wikipedia article on None of the Above in India, which is commonly known as NOTA. Our mission today is to unpack how this single button transformed from basically a basic tool for voter secrecy into a really powerful and sometimes chaotic instrument of democratic dissent across the world's largest democracy. Okay, let's unpack this.
It really is a fascinating journey. If you picture a bustling Indian election polling station, filled with long lines of voters and the hum of electronic voting machines, you usually think about people actively choosing a leader.
Yeah, picking someone.
Exactly. The entire architecture of an election is built around selection. But to understand NOTA, we have to look at the power of rejection. And that takes us back to a foundational moment in 2013.
Right, the Supreme Court case.
Yes. There was a landmark Supreme Court judgment in a case called PUCL versus Union of India. The People's Union for Civil Liberties filed a writ petition, and the Supreme Court ultimately directed the Election Commission of India to provide a none-of-the-above button on all voting machines.
So if the machinery was already working to elect leaders, what was the Supreme Court actually hoping to achieve by adding a button that essentially does nothing?
Well, the court recognized a fundamental gap in the democratic process. They wanted to ensure that voters who made the effort to come all the way to the polling booth, but decided they just didn't want to vote for any of the candidates presented to them, could exercise their right to reject everyone. And crucially, they needed to be able to do this while maintaining the absolute secrecy of their vote.
Because before this, expressing dissatisfaction might have meant abstaining entirely, right?
Exactly. Which doesn't leave a measurable record of dissent. It just looks like you didn't care enough to show up. But the Supreme Court had a much bigger, a more ambitious goal here. They observed that for the proper governance of the country, it is essential that people of high moral and ethical values are chosen as representatives.
They were essentially creating a legal mechanism to force better behavior.
They explicitly hoped that the NOTA button would compel political parties to nominate what they called sound candidates.
Oh, I see.
The logic was that if parties saw a massive spike in voters actively choosing to reject the entire slate, the sheer embarrassment and the quantifiable metric of public anger would force them to start fielding corrupt or ineffective politicians.
That is a massive philosophical weight to put on a single blank button. I mean, it was first rolled out in the 2013 elections across 4 states, Chhattisgarh, Mizoram, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh, as well as the Union Territory of Delhi. And figuring out how to visually represent that philosophy on a ballot was quite a challenge, wasn't it?
It definitely was.
Because our sources mention the official symbol wasn't actually created by the National Institute of Design until 2015.
Yeah, that gap between 2013 and 2015 led to some incredibly creative suggestions from the public.
I can only imagine.
So before the official symbol was standardized, there were actual serious demands submitted to the Election Commission to use a donkey as the official symbol for NOTA.
A donkey. I cannot get over the donkey detail. Just imagine walking into a voting booth to register your deeply held philosophical democratic dissent, and you are pressing a button next to a picture of a donkey.
It's pretty on the nose.
It is absolutely brilliant. It perfectly captures the frustration voters feel when they look at a terrible list of candidates.
It definitely highlights the public's mood at the time. But setting the humor aside, the reality of how NOTA functioned in those early days was actually quite strict. The Election Commission of India, or the ECI, instituted firm rules that severely limited NOTA's initial power.
How so?
They clarified that even in an extreme scenario where NOTA receives the absolute highest number of votes, the human candidate who secures the largest number of votes among the contestants is still declared the winner.
Wait, let me make sure I'm grasping the scale of this limitation. So NOTA could theoretically get 1 million votes.
Right.
A human candidate could get 10 votes. And that human candidate still wins the seat and takes power.
Your human still wins.
Wow.
The logic at the time was focused on maintaining government stability rather than allowing a blank space to just stall the democratic process. Furthermore, votes pulled for NOTA do not count when determining the forfeiture of a candidate's security deposit.
No, the deposit they pay to run.
Exactly. Normally, if a candidate fails to secure a certain minimum percentage of votes, they lose that financial deposit. Nota votes were excluded from that math, protecting candidates financially even if they were widely rejected. And while Nota was introduced for the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of India's parliament, in 2014, the Supreme Court actually scrapped the Nota option for those specific elections in 2018.
It sounds like it started as a paper tiger. It was a quantifiable metric of dissatisfaction, a way to vent, but it had absolutely no legal teeth to actually block a candidate from taking office.
Initially, yes, it was basically a suggestion box masquerading as a ballot option.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because even without those legal teeth, voters started using Nota in ways that completely shocked the political establishment. When nobody wins big, the numbers are just staggering to look at. Let's unpack the 2024 Lok Sabha election in Indore.
Oh, the indoor election is a perfect example.
Yeah, for context, the Lok Sabha is the massive lower house of India's bicameral parliament, so this is the major national stage. In that specific election, Nota pulled in over 2 lakh votes. That is more than 200,000 people. It captures 16.28% of the vote share and literally came in second place.
That indoor result is the all-time record, and it serves as a fascinating case study in voter behavior. It was reportedly driven by the last-minute withdrawal of the main opposition candidate.
Right, they just pulled out.
Yes, and this sudden exit left a massive block of voters completely stranded without their preferred choice. But instead of just staying home and ignoring the election, over 200,000 of them marched to the polls and aggressively chose Nota. They turned a lack of options into a loud, undeniable statement.
That is wild.
And that's not an isolated incident. In 2019, in Gopalganj, Bihar, over 51,000 voters chose Nota, which was 5% of the total vote.
We also have the 2014 Nilgiris election in Tamil Nadu, which might be one of the most striking examples. Nota garnered over 46,000 votes, capturing nearly 5% of the cast votes. But what makes this specific race incredible is that Nota actually beat out a high-profile candidate who was accused in the infamous 2G spectrum corruption scam.
Yes.
That is a massive national scandal, and the voters in that district walked into the booth, looked at a powerful politician tied to that scandal, and chose a blank button instead.
It demonstrates that voters are highly aware of the ethical standing of their candidates. But the impact of Nota isn't always about coming in second or third with tens of thousands of votes. Sometimes its true power is the invisible weight it throws around in a fiercely tight race.
The silent spoiler effect.
What's fascinating here is the concept of the victory margin. Let's look at the Madhya Pradesh Assembly elections in 2018. Across the entire state, the difference in the total vote share between the two major national parties, the BJP and Congress, was a razor-thin 0.1%.
0.1%.
It was an incredibly close battle for control. Yet, in that exact same election, Nota captured a vote share of 1.4%.
So the amount of people who voted for nobody was 14 times larger than the gap between the two major parties fighting for control of the state.
Exactly. And if we zoom in on specific local battles within that state election, the impact becomes even more stark. Take the South Gwalior constituency during those same 2018 elections. The sitting member of the Legislative Assembly, Narayan Singh Kushwaha, lost his seat by a mere 121 votes.
Just 121 votes decided the leadership of that constituency.
Yes. And in that very constituency, Nota captured 1,550 votes.
Just imagine the sheer power of those 1,550 voters.
Yeah.
If they had just stayed home, or if they had begrudgingly compromised and voted for the sitting MLA, the entire outcome of that election flips.
It really does.
They actively walked into the booth, looked at the options, and firmly chose none of the above. They didn't win the seat for a blank space. But by deliberately withholding their votes from the human candidates in a tight race, they completely altered the political landscape of their community.
It acts as an incredible sociological mirror. Nota has been described by some analysts as a sign of India's maturing democracy. We're seeing profound reports of collective action where entire communities use Nota to democratically protest against governments that have systematically failed them.
Yeah, the sources talk about those village boycotts.
Right. Our sources document multiple cases of entire villages deciding to completely boycott the candidate list and vote en masse for Nota because of a consistent lack of basic infrastructure. We are talking about communities that have been promised roads and electricity for decades, and they finally decided to stop playing along.
It goes beyond just roads, too. Communities have used it to protest inaction over severe industrial water contamination. There are even reports of sex workers using NODA as a coordinated tool. They have been trying for years to get the profession legalized so they can be protected under basic labor laws.
And when they realized no political party was paying attention to their demands or offering them any systemic protection, they decided to vote for NODA.
It's the ultimate silent strike.
It is a brilliant utilization of the system to highlight systemic invisibility. And it echoes exactly what the Chief Justice of India, P. Sathasivam, said when the NODA ruling was originally passed. He noted that giving the voter the right to express disapproval is vital, and he predicted, gradually there will be a systemic change, and the parties will be forced to accept the will of the people and field candidates who are known for their integrity.
But the sources also show us that NODA isn't just a pure, idealized tool of righteous democratic protest. It's a mirror, and sometimes mirrors reflect things society might not want to see.
This raises an important question about the shadow of bias in electoral mechanics. We have to look at all the sociological data objectively. The sources point out a very consistent, observable trend. Some of the highest numbers of NODA votes are polled in what are known as reserved constituencies.
For context, reserved constituencies are districts that, based on demographic composition, legally require the contesting candidates to be from scheduled castes or scheduled tribes. It is a system designed to ensure political representation for marginalized communities in India.
The observation documented in the research is that the consistently high NODA votes in these specific constituencies could be interpreted as a refusal by general category voters to cast their ballot for an SC or ST candidate.
It's a sensitive issue, and looking at the sociological data from the research, it highlights a difficult reality. To be clear, we are not taking a side here. We are just impartially reporting the observations from the source material. And that material suggests a scenario where the NODA button might sometimes be used to uphold deep-seated caste-based bias rather than just protesting corruption.
It demonstrates the profound duality of the tool. On one hand, a surge in NODA votes can be a beautiful expression of democratic dissatisfaction with corrupt options. On the other hand, the exact same mechanism can be driven by a lack of voter education, ignorance about the candidates, or an expression of societal prejudice.
Right.
The tool itself is entirely neutral. The intent of the voter is what gives it its ultimate meaning in any given election.
So at the national level, NODA is this complex, highly symbolic mirror reflecting both the best and the most challenging aspects of the electorate. But at the local level, state commissions decided symbolism wasn't enough. They actually wanted to give it real consequences.
The local bodies are recognizing the absurdity of the original rule, where NODA could win the majority, but the human still takes power. The tipping point seems to have been in Maharashtra in 2018. The State Election Commission there studied local body elections and found several astonishing cases that forced their hand.
To give some background, we are talking about Gram Panchayat polls, which are village council elections, and the election of the Sarpanch, the village head. The anecdotes from the sources here are incredible. In the Bori Gram Panchayat polls in the Pune district, NODA pulled in over 85% of the votes.
85%.
And my absolute favorite example is from the Kugan Kurd village in the Nanded district. The winning Sarpanch got exactly 120 votes. NODA got 627 votes out of a total 849. The human candidate was absolutely crushed by nobody.
When you are looking at results like that, where the mandate of the people is overwhelmingly to reject the candidates, seating the person who got 120 votes undermines the entire concept of democracy.
It makes a mockery of it.
Exactly. So the Maharashtra State Election Commission decided the existing laws made no sense. They announced an immediate amendment. If NODA gets the maximum votes in a local election-like municipal corporations or councils, re-elections will be held.
They finally gave NODA teeth. It went from a suggestion box to a hard veto.
It created a significant ripple effect across the country's local electoral bodies. The Haryana State Election Commission followed suit shortly after, declaring that for their municipal elections, NODA would legally be treated as a fictional candidate.
Fictional candidate.
Yes. If the fictional candidate wins the majority, fresh elections are conducted. And by 2022, the Delhi State Election Commission announced a similar rule. If NODA gains the highest vote, the results are paused, a report is sent up the chain, and new elections are declared for those seats.
I am obsessed with the phrasing of NODA as a fictional candidate. It's like the ultimate ghost in the machine of the electoral process. Imagine running a rigorous political campaign, spending money, making speeches, and on election day you lose to a fictional entity.
It's quite a reality check.
But this brings us to a massive debate highlighted in our deep dive today: the cost of democracy versus the cost of corruption. Because if we start treating Noda as a fictional candidate at the national level, throwing out election results and doing them over, that gets incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
Why hasn't this rule been applied to the big national races?
It gets highly contentious because of the sheer scale of the Indian electorate. There are many suggested improvements for Noda at the national level floating around. Advocates have suggested things like making Noda a virtual representative of the constituency if it wins the majority, leaving the seat empty for a term.
Interesting.
Others suggest forcing the political parties that lose to Noda to bear the financial cost of the re-election out of their own pockets to deter them from fielding bad candidates.
Hitting the political parties directly in the wallet, that would definitely force a massive shift in how they select their nominees.
There are even suggestions to legally bar any candidate who loses to Noda from contesting any elections for a defined period of time. But when public interest litigations, or PILs, were filed in 2016 and 2017 asking the Supreme Court to grant Noda this absolute power to reject at the national level, the Supreme Court pushed back hard.
Right, they argue that such a sweeping solution is unworkable at scale. The direct quote from the source is that holding an election in our country is a very serious and expensive business. And when you think about it, an Indian national election involves nearly 1 billion eligible voters, millions of polling stations, and massive security deployments. Rerunning a national election in dozens of constituencies because Noda won would cost a staggering amount of money and logistical effort.
The administrative burden is monumental. But that brings us to the counterargument, which is arguably one of the most powerful philosophical points in this entire discussion. Sanjay Parikh, a Supreme Court advocate who originally argued for the inclusion of Noda back in 2013, addressed this exact concern about the expense.
What did he say?
He stated that while people argue the implementation of a powerful Noda will drive up election expenses, a tainted candidate who indulges in corruption and malpractices is a far greater cost for the country.
That is a profound way to reframe the debate. Paper, electronic machines, and polling booths cost money, but a corrupt politician costs the country its future. Parikh essentially argued that the political establishment only uses the excuse of expense because of their desire to continue in power and their greed for money, which takes prominence over actual democratic values.
It is a stark framing of the issue. Are we, as a society, willing to pay the upfront financial and logistical cost of a re-election to avoid the long-term systemic cost of a corrupt leader? What is more expensive in the grand scheme of a nation's history? Printing more ballots or dealing with the fallout of stolen public funds and collapsed infrastructure?
So what does this all mean? We started with a blank button designed to keep a voter's secret, and we've ended up in a massive philosophical debate about the actual price of a clean democracy.
If we synthesize everything from our sources, Noda has undergone a remarkable evolution over the last decade. It began as a simple, highly restricted mechanism to protect voter secrecy, but voters have weaponized it, transforming it into a highly visible, quantifiable metric of the public mood.
Definitely.
It has become a catalyst for electoral reform, forcing local election commissions to rewrite the rules of the game and grant it the power of a fictional candidate. Yet at the same time, it is a complex mirror. It reflects the maturation of a democracy where citizens demand better, but it also reflects the deep-seated societal biases that can manipulate neutral tools.
Think about the systems in your own life. How do you register dissatisfaction when you are presented with a terrible menu of options? Whether you're in a high-stakes corporate meeting, organizing your local community, or just interacting in the marketplace. When the choices in front of you are all fundamentally flawed, do you just abstain, walk away, and leave the decision to others? Or do you find a way to actively step up, push the button, and officially vote for none of the above to force the system to give you a better set of options? The journey of Noda proves that sometimes actively choosing nothing is the most aggressive and transformative choice you can make.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, here's a final provocative thought to take with you. We've seen local state commissions declare Noda a fictional candidate capable of forcing re-elections and unseating politicians.
Right.
Imagine if that trend continues and scales up to the highest national levels, like the Lok Sabha. What happens if the voters repeatedly reject every new batch of candidates a party puts forward? Could the ultimate evolution of Noda lead to a scenario where parliament seats are legally left physically empty?
Wow.
Imagine a government forced to operate with a permanently reduced headcount. A stark, visual, and functional representation of the missing mandate of the people, holding the entire system accountable just by their absence.
A ghost parliament,
Yeah.
legally mandated by the voters. That is an incredible visual to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the options presented to you, and we will catch you next time.